Dichter is from Ohio, or Athens, Ohio in the US. Is the president of the NBIA, Jasper Welch. Jasper is connecting from by the phone. So let's see if we can get him online.
Good morning. This is Jasper Welch, the President and CEO of NBIA, and I'm pleased to have the invitation from the UBI Index to discuss the importance of incubator benchmarking, and we're looking at that as part of NBI's contribution to the global movement of business incubation throughout the world. We'll get to the first slide. In 1996, NBI established best practices guidelines. That came from some of our initial research that was done in the late 80s and early 1990s. And our research has shown that incubation programs that adhere to the principles and best practices have much greater degree of success and results than those incubators that normally don't follow a systematic set of principles. You can see some of the research that we've been involved in over the last 20 years. Our association has been here working in the United States and around the world since 1987. Some of the research that is mentioned is some of the initial research that was done in 1995. And then we've done a number of best practices, 3 pieces of research over the last 3 years. One was best practices in action. That was done by NBIA. We had 4 authors on that, working with one of our NBIA staff members. And we looked at programs around the world, including several case studies, and that is available through NBIA. Then we worked with the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, USA, Michigan, and they went through and looked at best practices that led to successful new ventures. That was a 2011 publication. And just recently, and Bridget on our NBI staff was the author and co-author, along with Simon Atkins, our longtime CEO, who recently retired in 2009. And they put together an excellent resource on best practices rural incubation. Bridget and the team featured 9 successful incubation programs in small communities in the United States, and came up with a number of best practices that were consistent with previous research. We'll go to the next slide. The 2011 report was a benchmark report that came to the conclusion that incubation programs that used best practices had the best results. There was some direct statistical linkage between the best practices, the guidelines, and the results. The other thing that they determined is that there is no one best practice, but rather a combination of best practices. And the reason this is important is I think any industry, whether it's business incubation or any of the sectors, both here in the United States and around the world, everyone was looking for the silver bullet, so to speak, that there would be one practice that would be above all others. And what we've done in our research is really a combination, a holistic approach, where a number of best practices, including benchmarking, are used to lead to better results within the incubator, and obviously those best results are reflected in successful companies. The other thing that came up is evaluation. One thing we found is that a formal method of feedback, an evaluation that's done annually, will help the business incubator, both the management, the governing board, if that's the case, or the advisory board, and the staff to be able to better adjust their program for better results as they move forward. One of the things we found within incubation is that it's a constantly changing ecosystem, and as new programs come on board, such as a number of new startup methodologies, that we need to adapt to those and make sure that we're reflecting the best practices on a regular basis. The other thing we found is that our funding entities, whether they're private sector, other non-governmental organizations, NGOs, such as a foundation, or other government agencies are looking for additional metrics before they make funding decisions. And that was further researched out and demonstrated in the UBI report. The next slide, I featured actually, this is a double rainbow in southwestern Colorado near where I have my personal residence. And I use this example because benchmarking really does act like a prism where you have a process that allows an incubation program to independently evaluate how it's doing on both programs and services. And even though there's individual, just like there's different bands of color, whether it's yellow or violet or blue, there's individual colors, but they really combine together into a prism for additional insight. Our next slide, measuring the impact. These were three things working with Bridget and the NBIA staff that would be summarizing the benefits of benchmarking, obviously to evaluate the program and making sure you're focused on your mission and goals and the results that you intended to make with the startup and the emerging companies. Two is reporting the impact data that would prove the results. It's one thing to say that we're growing new companies or generating job creation, though we'll talk a little bit about that later, but a lot of the job creation from a business incubator occurs in the out years as that company grows, both at the end of their time at the incubator and beyond. But if you can report the impact data, it really proves the results as opposed to just talking about them. It gives you metrics. We'll use the Ohio University Innovation Center as an example later in the slide presentation. And then finally, we can identify the areas for improvement and potential resources. One of the things that is really critical with the research, both benchmarking and best practices, to make sure that areas that are identified for your program, individual incubation program to improve, need to be incorporated back into the present program delivery. And so you can see that the conclusion here on the relationship statistically through the research is the incubation programs that collect client and graduate impact data for 5 years are more successful, and that was the 2011 research done here in the United States. You can see an overview here of best practices, and those that are viewing this slide presentation can read those for yourselves, but essentially it comes down in three different areas, and that's program evaluation, both the program, your services, and the service providers, making sure that the service providers and the programs that you're offering are relevant to the existing client needs, that your presenters are presenting on an educational basis rather than just giving a sales pitch. Normally that's not very effective in terms of growing companies. And that it's not just the people that are coming in working with your incubating companies, but making sure that they have consistent content. We just finished our NBIA Training Institute here in Fort Worth, Texas, USA, and we were very fortunate to have some very good presenters that both know the incubation business, but they also have content that matters for our incubating professionals that are under training. The next area is to really interview those people that are involved, both clients, graduates, your staff, stakeholders, community members. That interaction is critical because how the incubator impacts the community is going to come out in a number of different ways that simple statistical numbers may not prove out in terms of getting all the impact. And then finally, looking at both the strategic plan and supporting infrastructure for the incubator, looking at your entry and exit requirements, what's it take for a company to enter into your program. Several of our trainers at our recent training institute here in Texas indicated that the quality of the companies coming into your incubation program is a predictor of long-term success. And then making sure that you have full stakeholder engagement. If you're not careful and you try to run your incubator program kind of as a standalone situation and you don't get your service providers and stakeholders involved. Eventually, you may slip out of the best performing incubator only because that you got away from your core mission because you forgot your service providers and your stakeholders. So it's really important to keep all parts of the system in your head. The next slide, we have several slides to go through here and with a little more speed. This is our peer-to-peer benchmarking review program. It was funded by 2 other governmental agencies here in the United States. The ARC, Appalachian Regional Commission, is counties from 13 different states in the United States that have experienced economic conditions that are less than the national average, pockets of poverty, etc. And they've been a great partner with NBIA working on our rural research and the impact of incubators in rural areas. The recent book, 2013, that Bridget was the author along with Anna Atkins, indicated that the best practices in these rural areas do parallel best practices that our research has shown over the years. This is a peer-to-peer benchmarking review tool where we had an independent review of incubators. We ran this as a pilot project. TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, which is in the central part of the United States, state of Tennessee, and other surrounding states that are on a river system. TVA has been involved for a number of years, providing electrical power and also economic development dollars, working with NBIA. So that's where this peer-to-peer benchmarking review pilot came out. We have a number of self-assessment tools and then on-site consulting through the peer review. The next slide goes through exactly how this peer-to-peer, that's P2P, peer-to-peer benchmarking program works. And you can see some of the things that are determined in the benchmarking evaluations. Plus, we found that it's really important to review the documents involved in a successful incubation program, whether it's their mission statement, how they run their advisory board, impact data we talked about previously, particularly around best practices and economic impact, your number of clients and graduates. So a number of different metrics that would be used. Normally in the benchmarking program, and this is where the people side merges with the metrics side, is it's really important to have professionals that understand and know business incubators, and those experts would be on site conducting interviews, visiting the stakeholders, talking to the companies, meeting current clients, and really trying to get a better understanding of that particular incubator. Once that report is reviewed and there's findings, that would be reviewed with the incubator manager on site. But the main point of the peer-to-peer review program, we'll go to the next slide, is that you're going to have results such as we see at the Ohio University Innovation Center. This is where the NBIA offices are located within the United States. This would be our host incubator. Obviously, that incubator is operating as a standalone facility, and NBIA is fortunate enough to have offices there. It's an excellent example of how Jen and her team, working with the peer-to-peer review benchmarking program, were able to take the results from the reports. Obviously, they are at the top of their game on reporting metrics. They do that on an annual basis. They run 5 years of cumulative data. They have independent research coming in and looking at that so that they keep the independence of the research. And what they found is, in addition to the way they run their programs, as they got the feedback on a regular basis, they were able to achieve an increased number of clients. They were able to access additional networks and resources, additional funding for their programming, and obviously as they achieved success in the areas of incubation results, success breeds success. And they're an excellent example if anyone wants to contact Jen and her team, they'd be welcome to do so, as they are really one of the top incubators in the United States in terms of the way they run their program and they report their metrics. This is a little bit about the NBIA web-based self-assessment tool. It's available online. You can see the link. You can do a self-assessment. It's around 10 different best practices areas. Now, there's a little bit of a debate on best practices. Is the list 5 different best practices, 10, 15 we identified. I think it was 18 within the rule book. The point there is that you're going to have a number of best practices which contribute to better results. And in some cases, those best practices, rather than trying to debate which practice is better than other practice, as I said earlier in the slide presentation, but it's really a combination of these best practices that leads to the best result. We'll go to the next slide. Here you can see an example. These are 2 of the 10 different best practices management. Governance would not be government, but how you oversee, what's the oversight, what's the board governance for your program, obviously staffing, and there's 8 others that are in the list. Then once you've done your self-assessment, there's a number of sliders or dashboards, and you can see when you're compared to your group, how well you would be doing in different areas. Would you be underperforming? Would you be about at the average metrics, or would you be above average? And then a narrative report. We'll skip through that. That's self-explanatory. There's going to be some information. So a little bit of some of the conclusions that we've reached is that can give you the tools so that you can have a baseline for performance and then look at what sort of compliments are you achieving as you go forward. Ongoing evaluation will allow you to have feedback loops, which would come back to both the professional incubation manager and his or her staff, plus governing boards, and then information back to stakeholders to make sure that you're identifying any gaps in your service levels, service offerings, or if you're struggling with launching successful companies, what can you do to improve your incubation programming? And then it also can help you set criteria that as we standardize. So one difference is different areas around the world, your funding sources are going to require different metrics for funding to grow in future years. In the United States, we have more of an opt-in approach where people are opting in terms of what information they're collecting. We do have some areas in the world where there's requirements to provide that data if you get a certain amount of funding. I know that this summer we worked with the EU European Court of Auditors. They sent several members from one of their auditing teams to the United States. We were in the Ann Arbor, Detroit states looking at best practices incubators. NBIA was the courtesy host. And what the Court of Auditors were looking for is an idea of some of the best practices they review programs. So we're seeing more and more where the funding agencies are not just looking at the metrics, but they're also looking at how effective is the program. And then finally, this is Jasper Welch with NBIA, and I wanted to conclude our presentation this morning with a slide here on the last part of the slide deck. I want to recognize Bridget, our Director of Publications. She was involved recently in our rural incubation research. She co-authored that book with Dinah Atkins, our former CEO, now President Emeritus. We also have Tom Strobeck, who's our International Director of Training Events. He's located in Liverpool, England. And so you can access both the European market and our European partners. And he's recently had training events in the APAC region, both Taiwan, China. He has a trip coming up to Singapore. We're involved in Mexico. We have a project coming up in November, and a number of other locations around the world. In addition to Bridget and the members of the NBI team, we work with a number of universities, such as University of Michigan and others, in the United States on some joint research. And then I've listed our website as we have a list of all our publications. Those are available both in a hard copy version, many of them are available online or in a PDF version. If you have any questions on the research, you can contact Bridget at the NBIA offices. Her email address is on the final slide, and she could help you with any more details. And then finally, our international conference is coming up in the United States in 2014 in New Orleans. And so with that, I'll sign out, and I'll be available for any questions.